Good morning. Welcome to our Bible study this morning. We appreciate the presence of everyone. We have a number of visitors with us. We're glad that you've chosen to come our way. We're studying in this class this quarter the book of Job, and today we're covering chapters 18 through 21. We've got a couple of the friends' speeches and Job's responses in those. Before we begin, I'm going to ask Richard to open us in prayer.
Our Father in heaven, we're so grateful unto you today. We're thankful for the night's rest. We're thankful most of all for the opportunity to come together to focus our minds on you and on the great covenant that we have. We're thankful, Heavenly Father, for the time to study. Pray that each of us will seek to make application in our own life. In Jesus' name we pray.
Again, we're in lesson number 7, and with the speeches of Job's friends, we're in the second cycle. We've covered Eliphaz and Bildad and Zophar in their first speeches, and now last week we covered Eliphaz's speech in this second cycle of speeches, and today, lesson 7, chapters 18 through 21, we're going to try to look at both Bildad and Zophar's second speeches in this book and Job's responses to them. And as we've mentioned before, with the speeches, if you go through the 3 of Eliphaz and the 3 of Bildad, and for some reason only 2 with Zophar, you'll notice a common theme that they're telling Job the wicked suffer for their sins. So if you're suffering, you must be sinful. And what they're telling Job and what Job knows are 2 different things. And that's where the issues come in, that they keep telling Job this, and Job keeps responding, and he never claims that he's perfect. He never claims that he never sins, but he does know that he has not sinned to the extent of justifying the punishment that he's going through, or he's basically, as we've discussed before, sitting in an ash heap, covered in ashes and covered in boils from the top of his head, we're told, to the bottom of his feet. And he's suffering both night and day. He's not eased at all. And we know that Job has lost his 10 children. He's lost most of his possessions in terms of the livestock that he owned and the servants, those that tended those herds. He's lost most all of that. The only thing he had left was his wife. And instead of being an encouragement to him, his wife basically told him, "Job, curse God and die." And this is where Job is, and his 3 friends come, Eliphaz, Bildad, and Zophar, and supposedly they're coming to comfort him, make him feel better, I guess, if you will. We're not told all that, but we assume from just the reading that they're there in support, or initially that's why they come, but each time one of them responds, they're telling Job how sinful he is. And that continues in this lesson today. In chapter 18, we notice that Bildad, in anger, wonders how long Job is going to keep speaking in his own defense the way that he does, and that he regards his friends as beasts, and he regards them as being stupid. And the 3 friends attempt to get Job to confess that he's a sinner. And in this chapter, Bildad provides a lengthy description of the suffering of the wicked. So he said, "This is how the wicked suffer, and Job, you see how you're suffering, so you must be wicked." And again, he reaches the same conclusion that his others do, and the same conclusion that they reach in all 8 of their speeches that are provided for us. And Job responds by asking, how long are y'all going to continue to torment me? And they accuse him of being a great sinner. Job even mentioned, you talk about me being a great sinner. Show me. Give me examples. And you know, I'll admit I say this quite often when I'm watching television and there are all these claims made, one side against the other or the other side against the one, whichever way it is, and I'm thinking, give me examples. I'm thinking just, as I read this, I think just the way Job did. Tell me how you tell me that I'm a sinner, show me. Give me some examples. Number 1, how have I so sinned as to bring on this suffering? Number 2, how else have I sinned? Number 3, in other words, Job wants details. He never gets them. And then Job resumes here in these chapters in directing his complaints toward God. His friends can't give him any satisfactory answers, so it must be God. And he talks about his loneliness and the fact that he's being abandoned. He has been abandoned by his friends and by his family. And he feels that God is treating him as an enemy. But as we'll notice as we go through here, Job affirms his faith in God as his Redeemer. When he says, I know that my Redeemer lives. The song that we often sing, that title comes from that. And that he would one day stand on the earth and seeing God after his death. So Job knows. We don't know just what concept Job and his friends had of heaven and hell and the afterlife. I tend to think of it as they had limited knowledge, but they knew there was something after death. And Job says, I know that I'll be able to face my Father. That's one thing that he wants to do. He wants to talk to God. And he wants a mediator between him and God that can intervene for him. And he doesn't have that. As we go into this, we notice Bildad's rebuttal in chapter 18. In the first 4 verses, Bildad is incensed at Job. He's mad at him. Job, why do you continue to do this? He doesn't say die, but his attitude is almost like Job's wife. Job's wife said, why don't you just curse God and die? Bildad is asking Job, how long are you going to keep speaking as you do? In verse 2 in chapter 18, he says, how long till you put an end to words? And his point is, Job, I think it's interesting to me that Bildad is talking to Job about asking him, how long are you going to be speaking like this? He's mad at him. He's angry. Well, and I think, when I read this, I think Job could say the same thing. Why do y'all keep speaking like this? And so Bildad's making an accusation against Job that he could just as easily make against Bildad. But how long till you put an end to your words? And this is how he sees Job. Now, Job doesn't say this, but this is how Bildad sees Job looking at his friends. He says, why are we counted as beasts and regarded as stupid in your sight? Now, that's a pretty harsh criticism. Now, Job never said that. But that's what Bildad heard. You know, sometimes when people are talking to us, we hear what we want to hear. And that was Bildad's position. That's what he assumed Job was saying, so he just brings it out. We're counted as beasts and we're regarded as stupid, Job, in your sight. And Bildad continues this in verses 5 through 21. This is where Bildad provides a lengthy description of the suffering of the wicked. He talks about suffering, and he's talking about how the wicked suffer. And this goes from verse 5 all the way down through verse 21. He said, the light of the wicked indeed goes out, and the flame of his fire does not shine. In other words, what happens to the wicked? They simply fade away. And using figurative language here, Bildad says their light goes out, and the flame of their fire does not shine. Their fire may have a flame, but it doesn't shine. It doesn't shed any light. And again, about the wicked, Bildad says that the memory of him perishes from the earth. He goes away, he fades away, and those left no longer remember him. He has no name among the renowned. All of these, Job, you're going to just fade away. And those that are left, he says they're renowned, but I assume he's talking about everybody, that he has no name. When someone says, remember Job, people say, who's that? That's what, again, this is Bildad's perception. This is what Bildad says is going to happen to the wicked. And Job, you're one of the wicked. Now, he doesn't just point to Job and say, Job, this is you. But the implication's there. This is what Bildad thinks of the wicked, and therefore what he thinks about Job. Then in chapter 19, Job replies to this. He responds to his critic. In the first 6 verses here, in his reply, he too talks about, how long will you torment my soul and break me in pieces with words? And again, this is the 5th speech that these friends have made. And Job brings what Bildad's already said to him. Job brings it right back on Bildad. How long are you going to torment me? How long are you going to point at me and tell me how wicked I am? I've sinned just like everyone else, but I'm not one of the wicked. Job knows that. Also, God knows that. But Job doesn't have any talk with God. There's no revelation from God that comes to Job. But they both Job and God know that he's not one of the wicked. And he says, if indeed I have erred, my error remains with me. And there's where he's again bringing up, tell me what I've done. If I have committed sin the way you say I have, tell me what I've done. All of that error that I have done, it stays with me. You haven't told me any detail. You haven't told me anything about the sin in my life. How small it is or how great it is. You've not revealed that to me. Why do you think these friends haven't revealed that to Job? Because he's asked several times, why have they not revealed that to him? Anybody? I think because they didn't know either. Why have they not told Job the details of his sin? They didn't know what those details were. Bildad doesn't know. Eliphaz did not know. Zophar does not know. So I suspect had they known the details, they probably would have revealed them to Job. So now Job comes to God, making his complaints toward God. He said, know then that God has wronged me. So Job is going to reveal some of the detail. He can't reveal any more because he doesn't know. and has surrounded me with his net. And I take that to mean that God has done me wrong. And he sort of put his net around me to keep that wrong sealed in. And so that I can be identified as one of the wicked. Now again, we know this didn't happen. But to look at Job, where else can he turn? He can only turn to God. That's where he's coming from. Verses 7 through 12, again, he continues, Job does, to direct his complaint to God. Can't complain to my friends. They don't know anything about my sin. So who can I complain to? There's only one left. That's God. He says, if I cry out concerning wrong, I'm not heard. If I cry aloud, there is no justice. And again, Job doesn't just point and say God, but he's the one to whom Job is referring here. If I cry out about my wrong, about wanting to know what sin have I committed to bring this suffering upon me, if I do that, God doesn't hear me. Well, we know that he did, but that was Job's perception. If I cry out about this, God doesn't know. God doesn't hear me. There's no justice. Now, the friends say there is justice. The righteous are rewarded and the wicked suffer. And that was their pat answer throughout these speeches. Again, he's talking about God. Says, he breaks me down on every side, and I'm gone. My hope he has uprooted like a tree. Now, we might think, well, I get depressed sometimes, but I don't ever get to that point. Maybe not. But I can speak for myself. I've never been in the position Job's in. I've never suffered like Job is suffering right now. And if it were to ever get to that point, what would my response be? And again, maybe it was well deserved if that were to happen to one of us. But with Job, it was not well deserved. And he says, God has uprooted my hope like a tree. We've seen some pictures lately of some of the tornadoes they go through, and they take a huge tree and it's uprooted, and the root on that tree is as big as a house. That's what Job thinks that God has done to him. He has uprooted my hope like he would uproot a tree. He has also kindled his wrath against me. And he counts me as one of his enemies. Now, how far down has Job come? Long way. This is how Job responds to God. Undeservedly, but again, and I've brought this up a number of times, Job was not aware of the conversation that God and Satan had. He wasn't aware of what God allowed Satan to do. He knew nothing about that. But Job did know who was in charge. When it comes right down to it, forget these three friends. They have their opinions. God is in charge. And it's down to the point where I think that he counts me as one of his enemies. That's where Job was at this particular time. He continues his reply in verses 13 through 22, and Job talks about his loneliness. He says, my relatives have failed. and my close friends have forgotten me. Notice the next verse. And this is from the New King James. I'm going to ask someone for another rendering. But Job says, my breath is offensive to my wife. You know, Job doesn't pull any punches. He just tells it like it is here. My breath is offensive to my wife, and I am repulsive to the children of my body. Verse 17. Does someone have a different version of verse 17 in chapter 19? Okay.
The English Standard Version says, my breath is strange to my wife.
Okay, and then what's the next line?
And I am a stench to the children of my mother.
Okay, the children of my mother. He says, basically repulsive here to, he says here to the children of my own body. I'm not going to say they made a mistake, but that's a rendering that's a little different from what its real meaning is, because what about the children of Job's own body? Had 10 of them. What happened to them? They were all killed by this great storm. Brought the house down on them, and they were all killed. So we know that as we look at it, these are not children of his own body, because they were no more. They were all dead. But I think that the children of my mother, so here he's talking about, seems to me, his brothers and his sisters. Now, we don't know anything about them. How many brothers did Job have? How many sisters did he have? I don't know. But from this verse, obviously he had some. And he says, I'm repulsive, basically, to my mother's children. That would be my brothers and sisters. And I think that's the correct understanding of verse 17. Questions or comments there? I'm not a critic of this version and that version over another version. They all have their good points, and they all have their weak points. But here's one that I think the New King James translators miss that. It doesn't reveal exactly what it means. And Job says, have pity on me. Have pity on me, O you my friends. And Job, he ceases defending himself and talking about his friends' attitudes and all that. He just says, he talks about how lonely he is. Have pity on me, O you my friends. And I'm assuming here that he's talking to the three friends that have been talking to him. For the hand of God has struck me. Again, he's already said he thinks he's become one of God's enemies. He says, have pity on me, my friends, because the hand of God has struck me. This is the hand of God at work here in my suffering. This is where we are now. He continues his reply in the last part of the chapter, where here's where, even though he's complained about God, he's become one of God's enemies. God has struck him down, has brought this on him. But let's look at where he affirms his faith. As I referred to earlier, he says, for I know that my Redeemer lives. This thing doesn't like me very well this morning. And he shall stand at last on the earth. Here he's talking about God. And here he's talking about after his death. It says, and after my skin is destroyed, this I know. And that's a reference. After my skin is destroyed, Job's talking about after I die. After my skin is destroyed, this I know, that in my flesh I shall see God. He knows that he will see God. He wants to talk to God now. He wants God to explain to him why this has come upon him. But he said, even absent that, I know that my Redeemer lives. and I know that he's going to stand here on this earth. And after I die, in my flesh, I shall see God. And then referring to his friends, be afraid of the sword for yourselves. For wrath brings the punishment of the sword, that you may know there is a judgment. So you friends, and not that they've committed any grievous sin here, they just assume that Job has sinned, causing his suffering. But he says, be afraid of the sword for yourselves. Everyone, be afraid. Fear God. Because why? Because the final judgment is up to God. It's not going to be up to us. And he says, wrath brings the punishment of the sword, that you may know that there is a judgment. Then, in chapter 20, Zophar has a rebuttal again, as they always do. And here Zophar is going to talk about the wicked and the righteous. And we brought up last week, all these friends should have been aware of some of the wicked around them who were prospering, who were living in luxury. They were wicked, but they had it all. Did they not know that? Because they keep saying the wicked suffer and the righteous are rewarded. That's what they keep telling Job. Are they blind? Well, Zophar is going to try to explain that away. And he said, Job, do you not know this of old? Since man was placed on this earth, that the triumphing of the wicked is short. Okay, Job, you're right. Some of the wicked prosper. But Zophar is telling him their triumph is short. Well, he missed it again. Not for all of them. Some of them go through this life in luxury and they die, never having to pay for the sin that they've committed. But he said, the triumphing of the wicked is short. That's Zophar's conclusion. And the joy of the hypocrite is but for a moment. Well, if you look at the big picture, that's true. If we're talking about this life and then after this life, if you're talking about all that in the big picture, that's true. You can consider our lives right here are but for a moment. Because after our death, there's going to be an eternity. And we're going to go through that eternity in one of two places. Now, Job doesn't get into all that, but that's the case here. So Zophar is right here. I think he's talking about on a much shorter term than eternity here. But he said the triumphing of the wicked is short. The eye that saw him will see him no more. Again, he's talking about the wicked. The eye that saw him will see him no more, nor will his place behold him anymore. His children will seek the favor of the poor. He will go from being in a life of luxury, and after he dies, his children are going to be counted with the poor. And his hands will restore his wealth, but he's not going to be around to do any of that. And Zophar continues to explain and to tell Job that this sweetness of sin, well, I had to chuckle when I read that. Job is not enjoying the sweetness of sin at this particular point. No matter how little or how great his sin is, he's suffering greatly. But Zophar said this sweetness of sin for the wicked here on this earth, it's a bitter curse. Though evil is sweet in his mouth, and he hides it under his tongue, Yet his food in his stomach turns sour and becomes cobra venom within him. So this sweetness of sin is going to become bitter. It's going to be sweet to start with, but then when he puts it in his mouth, it may be sweet, and he can hold it under his tongue. But this food, when it goes into his stomach, makes his stomach turn sour. And he says it becomes cobra venom within him. And I understand that it may not be the most poisonous, but cobra venom is extremely poisonous. And certainly if he's experiencing it within his body, as Zophar is explaining here. It says, for he has oppressed and forsaken the poor. He has violently seized a house which he did not build. And he's talking about the wicked here. The wicked take advantage of the poor. And again, figuratively, they seize a house that they've not built. Someone else built this house and they seized it. They stole it. That's what the wicked do. They forsake the poor. They don't care for the poor. They forsake them, and then they seize a house that they have not built. And so, even though these three friends of Job missed the point quite often in their speeches, Zophar is pretty much on target with a lot of this. Now again, you look at the big picture of where's Zophar coming from. He's talking about Job. Job, you're one of these wicked. Here's what you've done. And we know that that's wrong, but when he describes the wicked, the truly wicked, his description is appropriate here. And he continues. He said, God will sweep away wicked into darkness in verses 20 through 29 of chapter 20. He says, nothing is left for him to eat. Therefore, his well-being will not last. Again, he's talking about the wicked. And he's describing one that he thinks, he's making a description that he thinks fits Job. It doesn't, but that's where he's coming from. He will flee from the iron weapon. Now, just what that has reference to, I'm not sure. Some sort of weapon, whether it was an axe or whatever they used in warfare. He will flee from the iron weapon. A bronze bow will pierce him through. Now, understand that bronze is not a very good material to use in a bow, because once you stretch it, it's going to snap. So I think even though he says here, he talks about a bronze bow, I really think he's talking about the arrow itself. The bow is not going to pierce an individual. It's the arrow that bow shoots. So he says, a bronze bow will pierce him through. Again, his point here at the beginning, God is going to sweep away these wicked into darkness. And he's right there. But that darkness is not going to be nothing. It's not going to be pleasant. But that's what God's going to do to the wicked. Total darkness is reserved for his treasures, he says. An unfanned fire will consume him. It shall go ill with him who is left in his tent. I didn't make that big enough. I might have a hard time reading it, but anyway, this is Zophar's description of what God's going to do to the wicked. And even though I'm not sure how clear a concept they had at this time of heaven and hell, but he's pretty much right on here. Total darkness is reserved for his treasures, an unfanned fire will consume him. And how long will it consume him? He doesn't say here, but he said it shall go ill with him who is left in his tent. If the wicked remains wicked, this is what's going to happen. And that unfanned fire is not going to be brief. It's going to be for an eternity. Now, did Zophar know all that? I don't know. We do. But he's talking about what God's going to do to the wicked. And again, keep in mind where he's coming from. This is talking about Job. And then Job replies. And he sort of goes along with Zophar that the wicked do not always suffer, but often prosper in this life. And then he says, bear with me that I may speak. And after I have spoken, keep mocking. He's telling his friends, just bear with me. Let me speak a little bit. And after I finish speaking, just keep on mocking me. Because that's what you do. That's what you've done throughout this. He's talking about the wicked who do not always suffer, but sometimes prosper. He said they spend their days in wealth and in a moment go down to the grave. Yet they say to God, depart from us, for we do not desire the knowledge of your ways. And again, he's talking about the wicked. God, get away from us. We don't want to know about you. We don't want to know about heaven and hell. Those are your ways, God. We don't want the knowledge of your ways. We don't want to know about you. This is the wicked again. They don't always suffer, but they often prosper. But after the prosperity that they enjoy in this life, then this punishment is going to come upon them. That's when they say to God, get away from us. We don't want anything to do with you. That's where they are. And then the wicked often die in comfort. How often is the lamp of the wicked put out? How often does their destruction come upon them? Not very often, he's thinking. They say, God lays up one's inquiry for his children, iniquity for his children. Let him recompense him that he may know it. One dies in his full strength, being wholly at ease and secure. This is the wicked. Another man dies in the bitterness of God, in the bitterness of his soul, never having eaten with pleasure. One dies in full strength, and the other dies in the bitterness of their soul. Then in the end, he rejects their answers. He rejects the answers of his friends that they're false. He says, where is the house of the prince? And where is the tent? The dwelling place of the wicked. That's where they are. Have you not asked those who travel the road? They said, where are the wicked? Haven't you asked those that have come by? For the wicked are reserved for the day of doom. How then can you comfort me with empty words? Since falsehood remains in your answer. So he rejects what his friends have told him. In this case, what Zophar has told him. I appreciate your attention this morning. We'll begin with the next round, beginning with Eliphaz next week. Thank you.